I mentioned before, and I've told many of you, that this summer I've been trying to raise some poultry at our house. I say trying because I haven't always been all that successful. We lost some chickens to a skunk. We lost some turkeys to incorrect feed and some cold temperatures. I've made some adjustments, and we've had a happier summer and fall, so things are better. And we have around 30 chickens right now and 9 turkeys, and for the most part, they all look healthy and delicious, too, I must say. Raising animals for the first time is not only a humbling experience, it's also a fascinating experiment in animal behavior. The breeds of turkeys and chickens that we're raising are bred only for size and speed. So the mad scientists who bred these particular birds were focused just on getting them as big as possible, as fast as possible. And when you breed a chicken or a turkey to look like an offensive lineman, that means you need to leave some things behind, like brains. Our butterballs are pretty stupid birds. I love them. I really enjoy having them around. I treat them as well as possible, but they're simply not very smart. Every time I feed the turkeys, I take a trough of feed and I bring it into the pen. I set it down, and the turkeys follow me in this single file line. But invariably, one will take a wrong turn out of the line, and it will end up outside the pen. The feed's in here, all of its buddies are eating the feed, and there's one turkey outside pacing back and forth, not able to figure out how to get to the feed, even though it's gone in and out of this door 1,000 times before. It just can't figure out how to get back in. It's not like there's one dim bulb in the bunch. They all are lacking some wattage up here. So we don't get to watch these birds solve many problems. That's not something they do, but it is fun to watch their instincts at work, their survival instincts. You get your little box of chicks from the post office. They're beep, 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 beeping. You get your little box of turkeys. You bring them home. You place them in the pen. You have some water. You have some gravel. You have some feed. They step out of the box. The chick walks over, looks around, goes to the water, dips its beak down, lifts it up, drinks, goes over to the gravel, pecks a little bit, goes over to the feed, pecks a little bit. It's never seen any of these things before. Doesn't have a mom telling it what to do. It just does it. It's amazing. If they get cold, they bunch together in a little huddle and stay warm. And then at 2 and 3 weeks, they start fighting over who's the greatest. When chicks are 2 weeks old, the males will run at one another from opposite sides of the pen. They'll run at each other. They'll jump up, they'll flap their little wings, and they'll bump chests. And then they land, and then they'll look each other in the eye, and they'll spin around. It's like a mix of the NFL and Dancing with the Stars right in my garage. Who's the greatest? At 3 weeks, I was out with my turkeys, and I was whistling something, feeding them, and I was whistling. I started whistling. They all stopped, and they looked up at me. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I did my best impersonation of a hen call. Thought, wonder what will happen. At 3 weeks old, this tom went poof, puffed up, started strutting around. Look at me, look at me. And after a while, then another tom puffed up and strutted around. But the first tom went right over to the other one, started pecking at it. How dare you try to be a man around me? This is my territory, that tom said. And the other turkeys backed up like, ooh, you're the greatest. You're the greatest. We won't mess with you. When our passage for today, the disciples and a mom are acting like chickens. They're acting like turkeys. They're acting like animals. Jesus has just told them he's going to Jerusalem. He's going to be handed over to the authorities, the religious authorities, and then handed over to the Roman authorities and be tortured and be executed. But he'll rise again in 3 days. This is the first time the disciples have heard this, and so they're taking this in, wondering what this means. It's horrible news to hear. And in that awkward silence, here comes James and John's mom with her hands on the robes of her sons, hauling them in. And she says, "Jesus, can we have a word with you, please?" And they step off to the side. And then she kneels down in front of Jesus, and she says, "Can I ask you a favor?" He says, "What do you want?" She says, "Could you grant that my sons, these sons of my womb, could sit at your right hand and at your left in your kingdom?" It's like asking the president-elect if you could have your sons be the Secretary of State and the Vice President. It's a comical request. In some etiquette book somewhere, there's an entry that says inappropriate times to ask for a favor. Number 1, when someone is losing everything to a natural disaster. Number 2, when someone has just told you they're going to be executed. Okay? The timing is not good. And what makes it worse is that it's James and John's mom that's asking. Okay? She's not just concerned about the greatness of her sons. She's living vicariously through her sons. Because if they are great, then she will be great too, because they are her. This happens so easily, doesn't it? This summer I've been playing baseball with Simon. He's a southpaw. He throws hard. I think, wow, wonder how good he'll be when he's 17. I wonder if he could be in the major leagues. Well, what would it be like to be a parent of a son in the major leagues? It just happens. Well, Jesus could have responded in so many different ways. But he says with gentleness, "You don't know what you're asking." And he turns to James and John and he says, "Can you drink the cup that I'm about to drink?" And they stand at attention. They say, "Yes, sir, we can." And he shakes his head. He says, "You will drink the cup that I'm about to drink, this cup of martyrdom," which is probably not the answer they wanted to hear. "But to grant who sits at my right hand and my left, that's not up to me. That's up to God." Well, then James and John and their mom turn and they walk away with sad expressions on their faces. But while they're there talking with Jesus, Peter and Andrew are watching. And Peter smacks his brother on the side of the head, says, "Why didn't we think of that? All we had to do was just ask Jesus if we could be the greatest. Now they're going to be the greatest. We missed you idiot. Why didn't we do that?" And by the time Jesus gets back to the disciples, all the disciples are running at each other, jumping up, flapping their little wings and beating their chests, looking around like this, trying to sort out who's the greatest, like a bunch of chickens. And Jesus stops them and says, "You know, the Roman rulers lorded over their subjects. They're tyrants, but it's not to be that way among you. Whoever wants to be greatest must be the servant of all. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as I came into the world not to be served, but to serve, but to give my life." This teaching asks us to unlearn something that's deep within us. Hopefully we're smarter than my turkeys that I have back home, but we're still animals. We still have this instinct deep within us to fight for position, to establish dominance. And if you question this, come with me to a 6-year-old soccer game. And you'll see all these children running around chasing after the ball. And it's so cute. It really is. But after a while, you realize that there are some who know at every point what the score is. And they know who's scored the goals and how many goals have been scored. And players know who the best players are. And there will be a rivalry among the top players, and you'll hear things like, "Now, they may have scored more goals than me today, but I know that I'm really the best player." It's natural. It's instinct. But it's deep within our culture. And we see it in politics, we see it in sports, we see it in families, and Jesus calls us to learn different behavior. Jesus tells us something else is more powerful than being the best. Something else is more fulfilling than being the greatest, and that something is service. In fact, Jesus tells us that service is greatness, and self-giving love is power. We've heard this before, but if you're like me, you need to hear it again. Last week, I was in my home church in Larchwood, Iowa, and I was preaching for a celebration service. They had their 125th anniversary, and so it was fun to be there. I got to see old friends and had a great time. The service went well. The church is growing. It's amazing. They have children everywhere. The service was so loud, I had to shout through the whole sermon just to be heard. I stayed with Rich and Paula Jensen. And Rich, when I was in high school, Rich started a soccer program for youth in Larchwood. And we all looked at him and thought, soccer, what's that? We play baseball. But he kept going. He started this soccer program. And then he ended up being the head of the soccer program in Sioux Falls, which is the big city right next to us. And so I said, Rich, I have a situation. I'm the coach of my son's 6-year-old soccer team, and I don't know anything about soccer, so I need some tips. And then he started telling soccer stories. He said, my pet peeve is when adults take the game out of soccer. Kids just want to play, and they need to play. And so it just so happens when they're playing soccer that they're just on a soccer field, but they still need to play. He said, one of my favorite experiences was when I was officiating a 6-year-old game. And there was a green team and there was a yellow team, and they were playing hard. And all of a sudden, these 2 girls on the green team decided they wanted to hold hands. And so they were holding hands, and then they decided to chase after the ball and kick it around. And they were doing it while they're holding hands, which is kind of a hard thing to do. And they were laughing and giggling, having the time of their lives. And then one of the girls on the yellow team saw them and thought, well, that's a lot of fun. And so she joined them. So here are 2 girls on the green team and a girl on the yellow team. And they're running around, kicking the soccer ball, laughing, giggling, having a great time. Well, at the quarter break, the girl on the yellow team went over to the sideline, and her mom was there. And her mom grabbed her by the shoulders and said, don't let me see you doing that again. That's not how you play soccer. And Rich said, and I was thinking in my head, well, to that girl, that was soccer that day. She was having fun. She was kicking the soccer ball around. And if she wants to keep playing soccer, which is unlikely now, she'll figure the rest out. It'll be fine, but she was having fun. Then he said, when I was coaching our 10-year-old team for Larchwood, we had a great group of guys, and we were having a great time. But what was most important to those boys was eating at Taco Bell after the game, because there's no Taco Bell in Larchwood. It's a really small place. So every time we'd go off, we'd play, and then we'd eat at Taco Bell after the game. And this was the big deal. And one day, one of the boys said to me, Rich, you know, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. What matters is where you eat after the game. And we loved it, and we all started saying this. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose. What matters is where you eat after the game. And one of the parents knew the owners of all the Taco Bells in Sioux Falls, and she shared this story with him. And so he made jerseys for our team. It had the number on the front, and on the back it said, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. What matters is where you eat after the game. Yo quiero Taco Bell. Now, besides being shameless advertising for unhealthy food, this is a good line, isn't it? It doesn't matter whether you win or lose. Greatness doesn't matter in the way that the world defines greatness. Or better yet, winning isn't greatness. What matters is where you eat. What matters is hanging out afterwards. What matters is relationship, love, joy. And I was smiling as I was hearing the stories because I realized Rich was touching every youth that he came in contact with, and the coaches and the youth that they were coaching. He was touching them with grace and reminding them not only that they're there to learn the game of soccer, and he taught them that, but that they're there to focus on relationship and fun and joy, that there are things that are more important than trying to be the greatest. He served those children by giving them what they really need, which is a chance to have a good time. Well, after Jesus tells the disciples that greatness is service, then he shows them what that looks like. He's walking through a crowd. He's a big, big deal. But Jesus is also able to focus on everybody, on the little people too. These 2 blind men are shouting for him. and he stops the crowd. He stops their shushing of the blind men, and he calls the blind men over. And he listens to them. He asks them, what do you need? And he listens. And they say, we want our sight. And then he touches their eyes, having compassion on them, and they can see. He listens. He hears. He serves. Jesus tells us that this is power. Listening to our neighbor, listening to a little one, and upon hearing their request, giving them what they need. Giving joy to a child. Giving food to someone who is hungry. Giving companionship to someone who needs a friend. Giving light to someone who's wandering in the darkness. This is what changes lives. This is what changes the world. And this is love. And love is more powerful than anything else. And that is good news. Thanks be to God. Amen.